Have you ever noticed how some of history's greatest minds were ignored, ridiculed, or even cast out by society? Thinkers who challenged old ideas and introduced new ways of seeing the world were often treated as threats. But why does this happen? Why does society reject those who think differently? Since ancient times, philosophers, writers, and scientists have struggled simply for questioning what others accepted without hesitation. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and asking uncomfortable questions. Galileo was persecuted for saying the earth revolved around the sun. Even today, those who challenge the status quo are labeled as troublemakers, naive, or even dangerous. But what's really behind this resistance? Thinkers are like lighthouses. In the middle of a storm, they illuminate the way, but they also blind those who prefer the comforting darkness of absolute certainty. They make people uncomfortable because they ask hard questions, dismantle illusions, and force society to confront its own contradictions. In this video, you'll learn about 3 great thinkers who challenged their time and, because of that, faced rejection and misunderstanding. Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, believed that life was suffering and that humans preferred illusions over harsh reality. Because of this, he was ignored and dismissed by his contemporaries. Machiavelli, the analyst of power, exposed how rulers truly operate behind the scenes. His ideas were twisted, and he was exiled from his own homeland. Lao Tzu, the master of Taoism, saw society as a rigid and artificial structure. Rather than fighting it, he chose to disappear, leaving only his teachings as his legacy. What do they all have in common? Their ideas were dangerous, not because they promoted chaos, but because they revealed truths that most people weren't ready to hear. This leads us to the central question of this video. Why does society fear and even reject its intellectuals? Is it because illusion is more comforting than truth? Or because change always provokes fear? Throughout this video, we'll explore these questions and uncover the tragic fate of history's great thinkers. Now I ask you, have you ever felt rejected for thinking differently? Those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. Nietzsche. Life often feels like an endless chase for something that never truly satisfies. Every achievement is quickly replaced by a new desire, creating an infinite cycle of longing and frustration. This was the perspective of Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism. While most Western thinkers searched for the foundations of happiness, reason, and progress, Schopenhauer saw something completely different: pain, illusion, and an endless struggle for something we can never fully attain. To him, existence was ruled by will, a blind and irrational force that constantly makes us want more, yet never allows us to feel truly satisfied. What does that mean? It means that we always want something, and once we get it, we immediately start wanting something else, an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. Imagine you dream of buying a new car. You work hard, save money, and finally buy it. But after a while, it doesn't seem that special anymore. Now, you want a better model, or maybe a bigger house, and so on. This cycle of wanting, achieving, and desiring again is, according to Schopenhauer, the very essence of human life, and it's what condemns us to suffering. The forgotten philosopher and the price of seeing too much. But who would want to hear such a philosophy? In a society that values progress, achievement, and optimism, Schopenhauer was practically an enemy of mainstream thought. His contemporaries believed that reason and science were leading humanity toward a better future. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, famously said, "Life swings like a pendulum between suffering and boredom." Rejection of his ideas came quickly. He tried to establish himself in academia and competed with Hegel, one of the most respected philosophers of the time. But while Hegel spoke of the grandeur of the human spirit, Schopenhauer argued that life itself was a mistake, and that the best way to deal with it was to renounce our desires. The result? He was ignored. His lectures were empty. His books sold poorly. His personality didn't help either. He despised the intellectual circles of his time and believed that most people were fools. He once said, "The more intelligent a man is, the more he suffers in solitude." According to him, seeing reality as it truly is distances us from the illusions that keep society functioning. Schopenhauer spent most of his life in isolation, living with his dog and writing for an audience that, for a long time, didn't want to listen. Only toward the end of his life did his ideas begin to gain recognition, influencing thinkers like Nietzsche, Freud, and even Albert Einstein. Why does society reject those who reveal the harsh truths of existence? So, why was his philosophy rejected for so long? Perhaps because no one likes to hear that their pursuit of happiness is a trap. We want to believe that we're on the right path, that the future will be better, that suffering has meaning. But the idea that we are trapped in a cycle of desire and frustration is too unsettling for most people to accept. This raises an important question. Do we avoid certain truths because they are too painful to face? Think about it. How many times have you ignored an uncomfortable thought because it would make your life harder? Does society reject philosophers like Schopenhauer because they force us to confront truths we would rather ignore? Now, I ask you, have you ever noticed that the more you understand certain things, the harder it becomes to talk about them with others? Few names in political philosophy spark as much discomfort as Niccolò Machiavelli. His name has become synonymous with cold calculation, manipulation, and a lack of scruples. But is this reputation fair? Or was he simply brave enough to expose truths that society prefers to ignore? Unlike many thinkers who idealize government as a force guided by morality, Machiavelli saw power for what it truly was: brutal, relentless, and indifferent to traditional ethics. He didn't write to please, he wrote to reveal the real mechanics of politics. This made him one of the most controversial figures in history. The Prince: Pragmatism versus Morality. In his most famous book, The Prince, Machiavelli describes how rulers must act to gain and maintain power. He doesn't focus on idealistic virtues, but rather on what actually works in the game of politics. He argues that a ruler cannot always afford to be good. In a world filled with betrayals, wars, and conspiracies, a leader must know when to be ruthless. Fear, when necessary, is an effective tool. It keeps order. But a ruler must also appear just and virtuous to maintain public loyalty. Does this mean Machiavelli supported cruel tyrants? Not exactly. He simply pointed out that morality is often an obstacle to success in politics. He replaced the question, "What is right?" with "What works?" But this pragmatic view came at a cost. To many, Machiavelli seemed to promote deception and political cynicism. The Catholic Church banned his books, and his name became a symbol of treachery and dishonesty, exile and marginalization. Machiavelli lived in Florence during a period of political instability. He worked for the Florentine Republic, but when the Medici family regained power, he was arrested, tortured, and exiled. In an attempt to restore his position, he wrote The Prince as a gift to the new rulers, hoping to be reinstated in government. But his plan failed. He died in obscurity, never returning to power. Yet, his ideas lived on, influencing figures from Napoleon to modern politicians. Even though he was rejected in his time, Machiavelli understood that political power does not forgive the naive. Should intellectuals fight power or work with it? Machiavelli teaches us a valuable lesson. An intellectual can either confront power and be crushed, or understand it and use it to their advantage. He knew that truth is dangerous. Exposing how power really works can turn someone into a threat to society. But a shrewd thinker doesn't have to fight head-on. Instead, they can influence those in power, subtly inserting their ideas into the system. This raises a crucial question. Is it better to challenge the system directly or learn to navigate within it to bring about change? If you had the chance, would you openly oppose power, or would you try to influence it from the shadows? We live in a world that teaches us to struggle for control. From an early age, we're told to plan, work hard, and follow rules to achieve success. But what if someone told you that the secret to life isn't control, but surrendering to the natural flow of things? This was the wisdom of Lao Tzu, the Chinese sage who founded Taoism. While society valued discipline, strict duties, and hierarchies, Lao Tzu believed all of this was an illusion. According to him, life doesn't need to be forced. Just as water finds its way without resistance, we should learn to flow with nature. This philosophy clashed with the established order. After all, if people followed his teachings, how could kings and rulers maintain control? Taoism and the critique of society's rules. Lao Tzu lived around the 6th century BCE, during a time of political turmoil in China, filled with wars and power struggles. The dominant ideology of the time was Confucianism, which emphasized social duties, respect for authority, and the importance of rules to maintain order. But Lao Tzu saw these rules as artificial and suffocating. He believed that the more humans try to impose laws and morality, the further they drift from natural harmony. He famously said, "The more prohibitions and rules, the poorer the people become. The more weapons, the greater the chaos. The more laws, the more thieves and criminals." While society tried to shape human behavior through rigid norms, Lao Tzu believed that true wisdom lay in letting go of control and living in harmony with the Tao, the way. But this idea was dangerous to those in power. If people stopped blindly obeying, what would happen to the structures of control? The voluntary exile, the thinker who chose to leave. According to legend, Lao Tzu realized that the world wasn't ready for his ideas. Tired of trying to teach something people refused to hear, he made a radical decision. He abandoned civilization and disappeared into the unknown. As the story goes, when he reached the empire's border, a guard recognized his wisdom and begged him to write down his teachings before leaving. This is how the Tao Te Ching was born, one of the most profound and influential texts in Eastern philosophy. After that, Lao Tzu vanished. His fate remains a mystery, and perhaps that is the greatest metaphor of his philosophy. True freedom isn't about defeating the system, but about no longer depending on it. Why does society fear those who reject control? Lao Tzu's ideas pose a silent threat to the system. He didn't call for revolution or encourage rebellion. He simply revealed that power is an illusion. Governments need people to believe that rules are essential, that order must be maintained at all costs. But Lao Tzu challenged this, saying, "Those who try to control the world always fail. The world is sacred and cannot be dominated." This raises an important question. Why are we so afraid of letting go of control? Are we trapped in rigid systems because we genuinely believe that without them, everything would collapse? Or deep down, do we know that many rules don't exist to protect us, but to preserve certain structures of power? What would happen if, instead of trying to control everything, you simply let life flow? What do Schopenhauer, Machiavelli, and Lao Tzu have in common? Despite living in different times and cultures, all three faced resistance, rejection, and misunderstanding. Schopenhauer was ignored because he dared to say that life is suffering and that progress wouldn't necessarily make us happier. Machiavelli was demonized because he exposed the truth about power, showing that it is not guided by morality, but by necessity. Lao Tzu chose to disappear because he saw that society was trapped in artificial rules that kept people from true harmony. And so, history repeats itself. Society claims to value wisdom, but when confronted with ideas that challenge the status quo, it reacts with fear and hostility. Thought, a force that transforms and threatens. Critical thinking is a powerful tool. It frees us from illusion, helps us see beyond appearances, and gives us the autonomy to form our own worldview. But at the same time, it is a threat to the status quo. Great intellectuals are like mirrors that reveal uncomfortable truths. and truth is not always welcome. Society fears those who think differently because they destabilize certainties, question traditions, and expose flaws in the system. They force us to confront the reality that maybe what we believe in isn't as solid as it seems. The intellectual, paradox, essential yet rejected. Here lies the paradox. Intellectuals are essential for progress, yet they are often rejected. Without questioners, humanity would stagnate. If no one had ever challenged dominant ideas, we might still believe that the earth is flat, that kings rule by divine right, and that knowledge should be reserved for the elite. But at the same time, change creates fear. That's why society often responds to critical thinking with isolation, defamation, or exile. What can we learn from Schopenhauer, Machiavelli, and Lao Tzu? Each of these thinkers teaches us something valuable about how to deal with society's resistance. Schopenhauer shows us that facing reality as it is can be painful, but also liberating. The world doesn't adjust to our expectations, and accepting that makes us stronger. Machiavelli teaches that confronting the system head-on can be dangerous, but understanding how it works gives us the power to influence it. Sometimes, direct confrontation is not the best strategy. Lao Tzu reminds us that trying to control everything is an illusion. Sometimes the best way to change something is not to fight against it, but to follow your own path, free from imposed rules. Each one of them responded differently to rejection, and that leads us to an important question. When the world rejects our ideas, should we insist, try to influence, or walk away? Even knowing that society may reject new ideas, does that mean we should stop questioning? Absolutely not. If history has taught us anything, it's that the ideas once seen as dangerous can later become fundamental to humanity's progress. So, don't be afraid to think differently. The discomfort a new idea causes today might be exactly what pushes the world forward tomorrow. And now I ask you, why do we fear those who think differently? And deep down, are we also afraid of becoming one of them? If this video made you reflect, leave a comment. I want to know, which of these three perspectives resonates with you the most? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking content. It really helps bring this discussion to more people. Stay tuned for more content like this.